Very glad you're with us for the Tuesday, the Election Day edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got so much to get to today. We're going to be talking about the unhinged leftists that wished death, noticing a pattern, against Montana Senator Tim Sheehy. And this person's not just a constituent. She's actually running for local office out in Montana. We'll also be taking a look at the insane Democratic efforts to further blue the congressional map, even in states where it's already really, really blue. And the overall efforts by former Attorney General Eric Holder to gerrymander the map. And in a moment, we'll be talking about the passing of former Vice President Dick Cheney at the age of 84, which we all learned this morning. And so, Jim, I don't know if you've already voted. I think we still got some races where we can be cautiously optimistic, but I don't know that there's any major races that we feel we've got in the bank today.
You're holding, for those who are watching the audio version, listening to the audio version, I'm holding up my I voted sticker. I really appreciate the fact that they now give them to you, because I think it was 2004, which, as listeners will soon know, was one of my all-time favorite election days. Somebody put one on my leather jacket, and then as I peeled it off, part of the leather jacket, it was a little discoloration there. And, you know, like you could say, oh, it's a happy memento of the 2004 election day. But yeah, this is why you hand people stickers. You don't stick them on people. Not that I'm still bitter about that.
Not at all. Okay. Well, we'll get to all of that in just a moment, but let's talk about Mizzen and Main. I've told you so much about Mizzen and Main and the fantastic shirts, different fabrics, but great fabrics, and how well they fit and how good they feel. Same with the pants. Good fit. I just send them the measurements, and they fit absolutely fantastic. And the best part is you don't have to iron them. You don't have to take them to the dry cleaners, even though they are excellent dress clothes. And that, among many other reasons, is why I love Mizzen and Main.
You know what, Greg? I'm going to come over to your office. I'm going to put this I voted sticker on your Mizzen and Main shirt. And I bet you it'll look just fine when you take it off. There won't be any discoloration, won't be anything like that. Mizzen and Main makes classic menswear with performance fabric, so it's effortless to look sharp and feel great. They actually invented the performance fabric dress shirt more than 10 years ago, and since then they've perfected it with modern fabrics. They're stretchy, lightweight, moisture-wicking, wrinkle-resistant, and completely machine washable. No more ironing or dry cleaning.
Right now, Mizzen and Main is offering Three Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first purchase at mizzenandmain.com. Promo code 3ML20. That's 3ML and the number 20. That's Mizzen, spelled M-I-Z-Z-E-N, and Main, M-A-I-N.com. Promo code 3ML20 for 20% off. MizzenandMain.com, promo code 3ML20. And if you'd rather shop in person, you can find Mizzen and Main stores in select states. All right, Jim, the big political story today, there'll be bigger political news tonight with the election, but the big political news this morning is the announcement from the Cheney family that former Vice President Dick Cheney has died at the age of 84. If you know about his medical history, it should come as little surprise that it was cardiac related as well as pneumonia. Dick Cheney, at one point after leaving office, his heart was literally so bad before his transplant that he didn't have a heartbeat, and he just had batteries kind of running whatever he had going on there mechanically. And, the Darth Vader, name that they gave him was kind of almost apt at that point. But Dick Cheney, quite a life, of course, came to Washington in the late 60s to work for Don Rumsfeld, who was running an office for President Nixon in the early part of the Nixon administration. Within just a few years, he was Deputy Chief of Staff underneath Don Rumsfeld for President Gerald Ford. Rumsfeld left to be Defense Secretary for Ford, and Cheney got bumped up to be one of the youngest chiefs of staff we've ever seen. And then after Ford lost, 1978, Cheney runs to be the congressman from Wyoming, wins easily, keeps winning all the way through 1988. Then due to John Towers' nomination being rejected for Defense Secretary, George H.W. Bush nominates Cheney. Cheney becomes Defense Secretary for those 4 years, becomes very well known, of course, for the Gulf War. Then he goes into private sector. Don't know if you've ever heard that he worked for a company called Halliburton. That never came up during his political career. Toyed with the 96 presidential race, ultimately didn't run. Also wasn't really toying with the 2000 campaign, but he did agree to go search for a running mate for George W. Bush. And George W. Bush decided he wanted Cheney. And so they won twice. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of talk about the Iraq War and the war on terrorism. Cheney, of course, basically running things for a while on 9/11 from the underground bunker at the White House while Bush was not on site. And so decisions like grounding all the planes and shooting down any others that might come along were left to him. But a couple of moments here, just from the debate stage that we're going to play here real quick, and I know Jim has plenty to say as well. Dick Cheney, Joe Lieberman from the 2000 debate.
I think if you asked most people in America today that famous question that Ronald Reagan asked, are you better off today than you were 8 years ago, most people would say yes. And I'm pleased to see, Dick, from the newspapers that you're better off than you were 8 years ago, too.
And most of it... And I can tell you, Joe, that the government had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Wait for it. Wait for it.
This question is to you, but
I can see my wife, and I think she's thinking, gee, I wish she would go out into the private sector.
Well, I'm going to try to help you do that, Joe.
Great line there. Pretty cordial vice presidential debate in 2000. Not so much in 2004. Here's Dick Cheney talking about John Edwards' performance on Capitol Hill.
And Senator, frankly, you have a record in the Senate that's not very distinguished. You've missed 33 out of 36 meetings of the Judiciary Committee, almost 70% of the meetings of the Intelligence Committee. You've missed a lot of key votes on tax policy, on energy, on Medicare reform. Your hometown newspaper has taken to calling you Senator Gone. You've got one of the worst attendance records in the United States Senate. Now, in my capacity as Vice President, I am the President of the Senate, the presiding officer. I'm up in the Senate most Tuesdays when they're in session. The first time I ever met you was when you walked on the stage tonight.
Dick Cheney might be the only politician who goes in for the jugular on an attack line as blood pressure actually drops. It certainly didn't go up anywhere along the way. There's going to be a lot of talk about Cheney, of course, endorsing Kamala Harris, which is, kind of a bridge too far for me, certainly, with some of the Never Trump folks. But he wasn't always Never Trump, as you point out in the Jolt today. So I think I've said enough at this point, Jim. I know you wrote about him today, but there's so much to think about when you think about the legacy of Dick Cheney.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's always good to hear from the late Senator Lieberman, the former Three Martini podcast guest, Joe Lieberman. Always, it was a good conversation a few years ago. Greg, I was thinking about this. I think you could make an argument, certainly within our lifetimes and maybe in the last, maybe in 100 years, but like the most influence, certainly in the last 50 years, I'm trying to think of other Americans who were not president who had greater influence over policy. And maybe you could say Ted Kennedy, maybe you could say Henry Kissinger, but I think he's up there. And you mentioned not just as vice president, but as Secretary of Defense. I tried to walk through kind of thinking about his relationship with the MAGA movement, and it's back in 2016. He was the only former president or vice president who endorsed Donald Trump to be president. George H.W. Bush, who was alive at the time, and George W. Bush did not. Now, some might have thought that was trying to help his daughter, Liz Cheney, but nonetheless, that was he was on board with that. Even helped get Rex Tillerson confirmed as Secretary of State. There was a decent amount of skepticism by Republican senators, including from, by the way, looking back, some irony, Marco Rubio, and who's now serving as U.S. Secretary of State. Cheney called him up and said, don't worry, Tillerson's a good guy. You can trust him. He's going to do, Now, Trump's relationship with Tillerson did not go great as the presidency went on, but it's just an observation that Cheney was, if not MAGA friendly, MAGA allied, willing to work with MAGA at various points. Post January 6th, Liz Cheney's criticism of Trump became much louder, stauncher, harsher. It became one of her central themes. And the people of Wyoming chose not to do that, to go down that path. Trump very much backed Hageman to remove her from that primary, and Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris. And I think for a whole bunch of as a never Trump conservative, that was a bridge too far. I was not on board with that. But then again, if Trump had knocked out one of my kids from Congress, maybe I'd feel the same way too. But just look at Cheney was always one of my favorites, and I guess I can now reveal it's been a big year for me and. Beloved elderly conservatives passing away, freeing me to talk about things that were off the record. So you showed some of that audio and video from the debate with John Edwards. Way back when I was writing the Kerry Spot, I covered that, and you'll recall that Dick Cheney's daughter Mary was brought up in that debate by John Edwards several times in the context of the discussion about gay marriage. And the Cheney family basically thought that was dirty pool, that was below the belt. And I, wrote exactly what you'd think I would write about that slime-ridden trial lawyer ambulance-chasing SOB. And apparently the Cheney family noticed that and appreciated that. So at some point, I guess I can also reveal this, Hugh Hewitt says to me, "What's your mailing address?" And I figure this is just to, send me a letter bomb at some point or something. And so I pass it along. A couple of weeks after the election, I get a very official-looking envelope from the White House. And I look at this and saying, what did I do? I open up. It is an invitation, and I have it over there behind my wall. Invitation to dinner with the vice president at a certain date, to myself and Mrs. Garrity. Now, at that time, Mrs. Garrity was doing some important things, and I was like, did you save the country? Did you do a Jack Bauer thing or something like that? Why are we being invited to the vice? No, it was apparently over. They appreciated this. So I and a bunch of other conservative bloggers, I'll let them decide if they want to talk about this publicly. We got to have dinner with the vice president, and the Naval Observatory is every bit as nice as you would think it would be. Lynn Cheney was every bit the most gracious hostess you could ever possibly want. And finally, after a little bit, the vice president comes in, and this is a big deal. And I'm like, kind of not starting out in my career then, but I haven't been in this kind of situation before. He had at that point, Vice President Cheney had just been over to, foreshadowing irony, Ukraine, and about the point. I talked to Viktor Yushchenko, who you may recall was the leader who was poisoned, as everyone kind of suspects, by Russia. His face was kind of disfigured by that. And he talked a bit about his meeting. This was very front and center on Cheney's mind at that time. And being the wise, sharp, quick-witted person that I am, I asked the vice president, does he now have a phobia about soups? And, the vice president just kind of looked at me and goes, and just kind of continues his story. So just one of those things about the great impression that I know. Unsurprisingly, the Vice President of the United States was much more interested in my wife than he was in me. I cannot begrudge him that. She has a fascinating life story. But it was a night I'll never forget. And it was just kind of, he was off the record and off camera. He's the same guy you kind of saw on camera, that he was, there was this dry wit. He was very well versed in all manner of politics. I remember talking a lot about foreign policy. I remember there was a discussion about immigration and the idea that I think somebody made a comment that was kind of in the tone of these immigrants are coming here and ruining this country. Something that was kind of xenophobic. And I remember Lynn Cheney saying something like, that's just what they said about the Irish. That's just what they said about the Greeks. That the idea that this idea of, the immigrants are coming here and ruining the place, it's a very old hair. And all of these people came and assimilated and became Americans. So anyway, it was just a terrific evening. And I just, always had a soft spot in my heart for the guy who allegedly had no heart. And when you said about how he could, kind of slip the knife rhetorically into Lieberman or Edwards without raising his pulse rate, I agree with you, Greg, but I'll admit it's very tough to measure. It's very tough to get a good reading on Cheney's pulse rate at any given time. But anyway, I look at this guy, and you want to talk about a guy who understood that we lived in a dangerous world. The other thing that's great irony is that how much he's largely not liked by the MAGA crowd, in large part because of the Liz Cheney's stances over the time. But really, you think about it, the worldview. There was a considerable amount of overlap in defense policy. There's a considerable amount of overlap in energy policy. I understand, you listen to Trump these days, and he really wants to control the Panama Canal, and he's threatening military force. Son, who do you think invented that? This was Cheney as Secretary of Defense back in 1989 when we got rid of Manuel Noriega. Maduro's denouncing Trump. Maduro was denouncing Cheney back then. It's really fascinating to see the parallels between what's allegedly this terrible neocon, warmongering, Bush-Cheney era foreign policy and this allegedly isolationist, allegedly non-interventionist Donald Trump policies we see today. I think there's a little more parallels than either side would like to admit. So anyway, rest in peace, Dick Cheney. You will be missed. And, great. I don't think we will see his kind again, perhaps in our lifetimes.
Yeah, and a lot on the left, especially the lefty randos on social media, are celebrating his death and calling him a war criminal and all this stuff. And I just would like to remind the left, you're the reason ultimately that he was in that position, because if Dick Cheney stayed in Congress and the Democrats hadn't tanked the John Tower nomination, he probably is never defense secretary. And if he's not defense secretary, he's probably never on the Bush ticket. And so by spiking the Tower nomination, you kind of accelerated his rise towards the vice presidency. Now, he might have ended up as Speaker of the House. He was the minority whip at that point, and I think he probably would have been minority leader. And ultimately, if the '94 revolution still happens, he's probably Speaker of the House, which would have been an interesting twist. But
Greg, that's an excellent.
You never know.
That's an excellent point, and to that I will say, thank you, Democrats. Thank you for making those decisions. Thank you for taking the John Tower nomination and all the dominoes that followed from that decision in history.
Amazing. All right. Well, let's talk about your business, not just Halliburton, any business. Every business owner knows very well that missed calls can mean lost business. A missed business call is like watching money fly out the window and potentially straight into your competitor's hands. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, formerly OpenPhone, and Quo is just the smarter way to run your business communications.
Quo is the #1 business phone system, built for 2025, not 1995. Rated the top choice for customer satisfaction with more than 3,000 reviews on G2. So you don't have to worry about juggling phones or using a landline anymore. Quo works right from an app on your phone or computer. Your whole team can share one number and collaborate on calls and texts like a shared inbox, which will give you faster responses and happier customers.
Quo is now offering three Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/3ml. That's QUO.com/3ml. You can even keep your existing number for free. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And for that, we are focusing in a couple of different ways. Number one, Eric Holder, former Attorney General for Barack Obama, his wingman, as he publicly said it. But back while he was Attorney General and even since, Eric Holder's been busy doing a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense unless you're a leftist. One is preventing states from cleaning up their voting rolls. He did that as Attorney General. Now he's very much in this push to get blue states to get their congressional maps even bluer. As a result of what Texas is doing, but now California is doing it and Virginia is doing it, and now we'll find out also that Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, wants Maryland to have a bluer congressional map, which can't get much bluer. There's only one Republican-held seat right now. But Eric Holder is also trying to delegitimize the Supreme Court. It's not the first time he's done this, but he was on a podcast, and basically because the majority's not in their favor anymore, the left just keeps demonizing the current system.
I think, the reality is, and it pains me to say this, I think the Supreme Court is a broken institution. And it's something that has to be, I think, a part of the national conversation in 26 and in 28. What are we going to do about the Supreme Court? And I think that we have to think about, again, talking about the acquisition and the use of power. If there is a Democratic trifecta in 2028, and I think the possibility of that is pretty good, Supreme Court reform is something that has to be considered.
He sounds so even-toned, Jim, but he's out there basically trying to sow division and undermine our institutions. But I guess it's okay when Democrats do that. So what do you make of Holder wielding this power kind of behind the scenes with the different organizations he's with? And what do you make of the efforts to make blue states even bluer?
Well, first of all, Greg, I don't know about you, but I was glad to hear it pains him so much to say that. I'd be curious. Is it a sharp stabbing pain? Is it a slow burning pain? Is it indigestion? Has something to do with you ate last night, Eric Holder? Something like that, When he says the Supreme Court is broken, I'd really love for him to elaborate on how he believes it's broken, and not just it keeps making decisions that I don't want it to make. Right? It's broken because it keeps wanting to have a strict constructionist view of the Constitution, or it keeps asking what the founding fathers would have thought of this particular issue, or something like that. We're going to have to. What are we going to do about the Supreme Court? I just want you to think about if a presidential candidate on the Republican side had said, I'm frustrated with Congress. What are we going to do about Congress? What are we going to? Anything that prevents Democrats from getting what they want instantly becomes a problem. Now, to be like one of those old software salesmen, it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? The whole point of this is that it's not supposed to be easy to snap your fingers and make something happen under our side. It's supposed to be hard to get stuff passed. You have to build consensus first. And that means convincing people who don't always agree with you all the time, right? If you actually wanted that to happen, this would be like the 60 vote threshold for, that's not ungodly. Somebody's got a 50%, so the lowest you can have as the majority is 50, and having the vice presidents, breaking the tally. Republicans have 53 right now. On the issue of continuing resolution, they got 3 more. They're at 56, right? Convincing 4 more. You don't, you and I and a whole bunch of other conservatives, including a whole bunch of Senate Republicans and John Thune, have said we're not getting rid of the filibuster just because we're frustrated here and now, right? There's a kind of this idea of, at least most Republicans have this sense, the Constitution is built the way it is for a reason. And it's hard to change, but not impossible to change for a reason. Because you don't want the Constitution changing willy-nilly. We also don't want Supreme Court justices changing their interpretation of the Constitution willy-nilly. We want it to be really hard to change it. We want precedent to matter. Now, every once in a while, you get something that's like really, really wrong, right? Brown versus Board of Education, right? Segregation's okay. That was a really wrongly decided one, right? So the Supreme Court has to have the ability to say, whoa, our predecessors were a bunch of morons. They completely botched this one. This is, we need to have that opportunity. But otherwise, when you don't get your way at the Supreme Court, you don't instantly decide, it's time to pull the FDR card and add more Supreme Court justices. And if you want to enact term limits, I don't like that idea, but you're free to try to pass that as a constitutional amendment. Now, there's a very big question of do you grandfather in everybody who's there right now? And do you say starting now, there's a 20-year term limit on the Supreme Court or something? We could have that discussion. I'm not a big fan of those ideas, but if you applied it to everybody, then maybe you'd have an opening there. But that's not what Eric Holder's arguments are entirely. We are not getting what we want. Therefore, the Supreme Court is broken. We are not getting what we want. Therefore, the Constitution is broken. No, that's not the way any of this stuff is supposed to work. I've turned into that old lady in the commercial. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. When you're putting faces on the wall for your Facebook.
Yeah, no, it's true. And so we'll see what happens in Maryland. I'm sure they'll try to figure out that map and getting the whole Eastern Shore into separate districts. I don't know how they'll make that work, but I'm sure they'll try. And other states are happening as well. But Eric Holder, I feel like he kind of slips under the radar as in the minds of a lot of people, not being one of the great political villains of our time. But the more you see where he pops up, he's pretty much stirring up trouble wherever he goes. So
just 2 other thoughts on Maryland. So that you mentioned, there's one Republican district in Maryland, right? It's 7-1. That one of you had 8-0, right? Of those other Democratic districts, there's one that's D+3 that you could argue is a swing district. Everything else is D+10 or higher. These are numbers from the Cook Partisan Voting Index. They basically run the numbers and say, okay, which way what's the usual turnout? What's the usual result in a district like this? Everything else is D+10, including a D+37. How much more do Maryland Democrats want the map in their favor? It's too competitive right now? And it's the same thing going on in California. As we're recording this, they're voting out there. Extremely likely that the Gavin Mander is going to pass out there, knock out 5 existing House Republicans. Now, I point out, there are 9 House Republicans representing California right now. Some of them, like Darrell Iss's district, is pretty darn red. And no matter how you draw the lines, you're going to have a big chunk of Republicans there. But there are other ones like Young Ken Calvert. These are swing districts. When you hear people saying, I want mid-decade redistricting, what they're talking about is eliminating swing districts. Now, would I rather see a Republican House than a Democratic House? Absolutely. But I like having swing districts. They're kind of useful. The fact that, when every district is D+20 or R+20, you end up in a situation where there's no competition. That doesn't really matter. Nobody bothers to show up because they know the election's done before it got started. So I think it's good to have swing districts. And every time you hear this, whether it's Maryland, whether it's California, whether it's Texas, you end up in a situation where we're basically saying we want to have as few competitive House districts as possible, and I don't think that's good for the country.
Well, we'll see where it goes. In Maryland and Virginia, we'll see what happens with the Virginia legislative elections today. That'll tell the story in Virginia. Maryland, I'm guessing that's going to be a fait accompli because the lopsided legislature heavily favors whatever the Democrats want to do. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. But let's talk about dose. Let's be honest, modern life can be pretty tough on our bodies. Processed foods, stress, environmental elements, late nights. Well, your liver is working overtime during all that to filter all of that out. And if you've been feeling sluggish or you're just feeling off, your liver might be trying to tell you something. But that's why there's Dose for your liver. It's a clinically backed liver liquid health supplement taken in a daily 2-ounce shot and tastes like fresh squeezed orange juice. It will cleanse the liver of unwanted stressors that's slowing the liver down. Dose has 0 sugar, 0 junk, and 0 calories.
Now, what can you expect when you're drinking your Dose daily? You're going to reduce that sluggishness. You're going to get rid of those midday crashes. You're going to support your metabolism. And it's even going to aid your daily digestion. Now, why can you trust Dose? Because it gets real results, with 2 double-blind, placebo-controlled studies showing a positive impact on liver enzyme levels.
If you're ready to give your liver the support it deserves, head to dosedaily.co/3ml or enter 3ml to get 35% off the first month of your subscription. Your body does so much for you. Let's do something for it. That's dosedaily.co/3ml for 35% off your first month's subscription. All right, Jim, some true craziness, some true insanity in our final martini today. It's just a little over a month ago that we learned about the 2022 text exchange where Jay Jones, the Democrat running for Attorney General in Virginia, was talking to another colleague on the Republican side and suggesting the murder of the current Speaker of the Virginia House, maybe the children, so his wife would have to hold a dying child, and maybe Todd Gilbert would have to change his mind on policy. Well, out in Montana, Tim Sheehy is the brand new Republican senator out there, beat John Tester last November, and he voted in support of the One Big Beautiful Bill earlier this year. Democrats did not like that at all. One constituent is named Haley McKnight, and now Haley McKnight, in addition to being a constituent, is also running for the Helena City Commission. And so this was her voicemail. Think about actually leaving this on a voicemail to Senator Sheehy, apparently earlier this year.
Hi, this is Haley McKnight. I'm a constituent in Helena, Montana, and I just wanted to let you know that you are the most insufferable kind of coward and thief. You just stripped away health care for 17 million Americans, and I hope you're really proud of that. I hope that one day you get pancreatic cancer and it spreads throughout your body so fast that they can't even treat you for it. I hope that you die in the street like a dog. One day you're going to live to regret this. I hope that your children never forgive you. I hope that you are infertile. I hope you never manage to do ever again. You are the worst piece of I've ever had the misfortune of looking at. And you don't serve Montanans. You serve your own private interests. All that you have done since you've gotten into power is do for yourself. God forbid that you ever meet me on the streets, because I will make you regret it. You. I hope you die.
So, Jim, I mean, I almost cracked up at where she started off with kind of an enthusiastic hi, and then within 15 seconds was wishing death on Senator Sheehy. But, this is not an office as high as Attorney General of Virginia, but it just kind of shows the mentality where if somebody votes or champions a bill that disagrees with where you are, then you all of a sudden are wishing death upon people. We have a problem, and it's not very isolated anymore, it seems.
So this comes from my distinguished colleague, Audrey Fahlberg, who seems to be generating at least one jaw-dropping scoop per week. Audrey, please stay with us forever because you're awesome. But anyway, like the detail in this story that really jumped out at me is that she called up McKnight and said, do you regret any of that? And the answer was no. Pressed on whether her voicemail went too far, McKnight said, no, I don't think so. She said that she had friends who have died from pancreatic cancer because they could not get the help they need and the health care that they... So that's why she believes it is correct to wish cancer upon Senator Sheehy. Now, earlier this year, I had the opportunity to interview Casey DeSantis at the National Review Ideas Summit. Now, as probably a lot of listeners know, she was diagnosed with breast cancer in October 2021 and thankfully declared cancer-free in March 2022. And I began my comments, I asked the crowd, how many of you have lost someone you love to cancer? And just about every hand went up. And I said, how many of you have a loved one who's fighting cancer? Then the rest of those hands went up. That this was, this is something that's like almost universal. Almost everybody has lost somebody they love because of cancer. And we've made great strides in treatment. I know people who are fighting it right now, and some people who are doing great, and some people who are having a tough time. And also the other thing I would point out, like, look, we all get mad. We all get angry. A lot of us, I certainly have lost my temper plenty of times, and it's not great. So, that's to error is human. I think it's the call back later when Audrey calls up and said, do you regret anything you said? Do you think anything went too far? It would have been really great for this woman to say, yeah, I really shouldn't have wished cancer upon him. I just want to see him defeated and out of office. But it's a free country. You can hate elected officials, but you really should not walk around with this much hatred in your heart. And I do feel like something has genuinely changed in our culture to the point where certain people believe this is a substitute for having a personality. This is how they define themselves. It's not just like, oh, you think you hate the other party that much. Look at me. Look at how much I hate the people. This has just become all-consuming. And I don't think this is the way you're supposed to live your life. I don't think it's psychologically. I don't think it's religiously. I don't think it's I think by a whole bunch of different measures, this is the sign of someone who's like deeply, deeply trolled. Look, you and I make fun of elected officials all the time on this podcast. I'm not saying you have to love all of them. I'm not saying you have to respect all of them. I'm not saying you have to sing their praises. But you probably should not run around saying, ooh, I hope they get cancer, and all of that. Bonus points to Sheehy for his response where she said, I hope you go infertile. He's like, I got 4 kids. I'm doing okay. Just this sheer, and I think that's probably the best way to handle this, but it is a little frightening. I do think that, after the Charlie Kirk shooting, after the Jay Jones thing, you just kind of see all of these people for whom hatred of the opposition. And I know it exists on both sides, but it certainly feels like we're seeing a lot of this amongst Democrats. And I wonder if you're a Republican, you say, I hope that Democrat dies. I hope that Democrat gets, cancer. Maybe you have some friend, some Christian who was like, that's not what Christ wants you to do. That's not being a good person. That's not being a good ambassador for your worldview and the values that you claim to espouse. And I don't know if these Democrats have people in their lives who can tell them that, who would say, dude, this is not who you want to be. This is not, you are not stopping hate in this world by expressing it and professing it. And the other second thing is, remember, it's not just that Jay Jones texted all these terrible things. It's that when a Republican lawmaker said, dude, you don't want to say this, he called up and argued and said, yes, the world would be a better place if Republican lawmakers saw their children's dying in their arms. Jay Jones probably belongs in an insane asylum. Never mind, in the state attorney general's office. And so, you worry about people. You worry about whether these people are someday going to pick up a gun or do something else radical or something like that. She says, I hope you don't run into me in the streets. Now, you run into an elected official in the street, you can give him a piece of your mind. Apparently, my uncle once ran into Peter King in the dentist's office. When Peter King, the former congressman, was sitting there with all the pieces in his mouth, and he couldn't get away. And so my uncle got to give Peter King a piece of his mind when there was nothing Peter King could do. And the only thing Peter King could say, I don't all that kind of stuff. It was a sweet moment in my uncle's life. But in the end, senators come and go. Governors come and go. Presidents come and go. As we began this program talking about Dick Cheney, everybody's going to leave the stage at some point. The question is, who are you and who do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? And I hope you're not the kind of person who runs around leaving voice messages hoping people get pancreatic cancer. But even worse, with that cheerful, hi, call me back, bye, the kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, and all for making able-bodied Medicaid recipients either look for or find work.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't seem like the most hateful thing ever. Yeah. But the larger lesson is, first of all, don't have those raging thoughts, but definitely don't leave it on voicemail or write it in an email. Calm down and then call back if you really want to talk to them without looking like an absolute insane person.
I'm sorry, I was trying to reach my state senator. That Senator Sheehy was totally different. Sorry, wrong one. Somebody once wrote in response to a Washington Post column I'd written that I had been sucking up to Trump the entire time. And I was, and I know they say don't read the comment section, but I was like, how could you I'm fuming. And my dear colleague, Ramesh Panura, who himself is overcoming cancer, and God bless him. Ramesh said, I think she thinks you're Mark Thiessen. And all of a sudden, everything made sense. Oh, you're thinking of a completely different Washington Post columnist. Yes, he's right of center. Yes, we agree on a bunch of stuff, but he's been much more pro-Trump than I have. And it was just this. So that's how you get out of it, if you've really, embarrassed yourself by saying something terrible. Oh, I didn't mean you. Sorry, wrong line. I'm a hateful maniac, but not towards you.
All right. Well, the rest of the week on the 3 Martini Lunch is going to look a little bit different. Jim is away for the rest of the week. We will have a normal episode tomorrow. And then I'm also out on Thursday and Friday, but Jim and I have already recorded special episodes to run on Thursday and Friday. On Thursday, we'll be taking a look at our favorite, least favorite, and craziest elections of our lifetimes. And then on Friday, we're going to take a look at some of the stories that could have been martinis but slipped through the cracks, got overshadowed by some other stories. So make sure you check out all of those episodes. Jim, have a great day. See you soon.
See you later, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. And coming soon, Facebook and Instagram. Have a great Tuesday. Don't forget to vote. And join us again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.